Now, when I decided I was going to do Admiral James Somerville, I knew I wasn't going to do a regular video about him. I wasn't going to do something which focused on the big events, mainly because, well, Meza, Kabir, and other events with Force H, I've kind of covered in other videos, but also they are the finished product. They're him at the end of his career, and they're things everyone will hear about. I wanted to do a video that stops in 1932. It looks at the longest apprenticeship anyone had with senior officers. And the reason he had the apprenticeship with senior officers he did, and the reason why he had the command experience he did, was because he has a very rare and very special skill. Basically, I wanted to do a video, which explains why we make the quip that Beatty had a choice between Seymour and Somerville, and he chose Seymour. Because, literally, those were the options. Somerville was the available officer of his specialty when Beatty chose Seymour. What is Somerville's specialty? What is this man's great skill set that means that he should be at an admiral's side in any major conflict and far more useful than an officer from the general pool? We'll get into that, but basically, Somerville is a signals officer. Somerville is a wireless telegraphy specialist. Somerville is probably one of the best officers in the Royal Navy, not just in the 1910s, but throughout the 1920s, 30s, 1900s. Arguably one of the best signals officers and wireless technology, wireless telegraphy and radio officers in terms of understanding the science as well and technology as well as the practice that the Royal Navy has had for his time ever. You are talking about someone who could quite easily have been his generation's equivalent of Marconi. This is the point about Somerville, and it's often forgotten. He is incredibly skilled at what he does. And he bases a lot of his command decisions on his communications experience. This means he will try things which other commanders won't even consider because he will place far more value on those intercepts, on that information, than they might necessarily place it because he knows their value. He is a key officer in setting up huge amounts of intelligence gathering systems around the world for the Royal Navy and Britain. And he doesn't just do it as part of the Royal Navy. He is good enough at his job that he is invited to the Imperial College. Not the university, the Imperial College, and we'll talk about this, to teach members of the Army and the Royal Air Force on request of those other services. Britain's armed forces are not quite like the Japanese in this period, but even today, if you're a member of one branch and the other branches are requesting you be positioned to teach them, that is a big thing. That is a really big thing. Possibly shouldn't be, but it is basically them admitting that in all their service, they haven't got someone who's quite as good as this person is. There is a reason why Somerville, despite being ill, is drawn out of retirement to work first on radar and its integration navy, then goes and supports at the evacuation of Dunkirk, supporting all the team doing that, and then from there gets given Force H because he's considered available and because Churchill's heard this guy really knows what he's talking about and is really skilled, and he is. But he'd ruined his health already, and he was now back for more. There is sadly a reason that he dies in 1946. He's 49 years old when he dies. 49. I suppose for the Royal Navy's sake, they're rather lucky that he didn't die in 1939. because they lost so many admirals then. His service was 1897 to 1946. He was born 1882. He was 15 years old when he joined the Royal Navy. Died 19th of March 1949. Yeah, he was another option for doing a video about on my birthday. It's a weird thing when you realise you share overlapping dates with someone like this. But saying that, it was an expansive service. He served. His first service at sea was aboard HMS Royal Arthur, which is a lovely vessel, which was actually younger than he was. So it's quite a relatively modern vessel. And it's during its short stint with the Channel Fleet. He's considered good at his job. He's considered an active young officer, very energetic, very helpful, very skilled. All these are good things. He shows an aptitude for technology from an early age, but also he shows an active aptitude for communications. How does this come through? When they have him passing on messages, it's often found that he doesn't pass on the exact message. He passes on the correct content and emphasis on a message, but it gets adjusted. Now you might think, well, that's normal. Human running from one position on a ship to another position on a ship to pass a message verbally in a situation is going to adapt the message. Yes. But the thing that's noted about it is he manages to make it more succinct. And I found this lovely piece of information written in an aside in a very old book. And I have no idea how true it is, because it's written, I found it in one book. One little old book. Published in 1950 something. It was in Churchill College Archives? I know I haven't been able to get a copy of the book myself. I think it was in the archives. And I've never been able to find any quotes discussing his early career aboard Arthur elsewhere. And it's just an aside. Just an aside. And I looked at him and went, that's Somerville they're talking about. But it fits. It fits. That was a good book. But the thing is, when does his career really start to get interesting? When does he really start to work? Well, that's when he goes to HMS Warspite. Now, he'll make a sub-lieutenant on the 15th of December 1901, and he'll serve most of his time aboard Warspite with two particular officers who give him a very good grounding. They pick him up and they start to train him already because he's been recognised as having aptitude for communications. And this really matters to the Admiral there, because this is his station flagship. The Admiral is a guy called Andrew Bickford. And Bickford, well, let me put it this way. There's a reason why the signal tower built in Esquimalt, New Columbia in Canada is British Columbia. Not New Columbia. British Columbia. It's named the Bickford Tower. Kind of obsessed with communications. Believed it was fundamental to the direction of forces in war, to their ability to operate, to their ability to be used effectively also for conflict management and deterrence. And one of the things you realise with Bickford is that, despite experience of HMS Talia on the Anglo-Egyptian War, the reason he's forgotten out of history, despite being one of the Royal Navy's, I would argue, masters of conflict management, and serving on the Pacific Station with distinction for doing that and managing risks, etc., was he was very, very good at working out where to deploy forces and communicating to them where they needed to go and coordinating with them. And he believed long-range signaling improved this. And when he found he had, I'm not sure if I already mentioned this, but a young gentleman who, through his grandmother on his father's side, that's his father's mum's side, a descendant of Admirals Hood, both Hoods, connected to their family tree. Yeah, he did take a bit of a liking to him. He did give him a bit of a chance, a bit of advancement. It's one of those things of, you will find not just there's the lineage in the Royal Navy of officers in terms of their faction within the Royal Navy. Communication specialist is a faction within the Royal Navy. Still going to this day. Still an interesting group. Can trace itself back to another admiral called Admiral Keppel, who was very into communication standards and really did start off that faction. But there's also always a familial lineage, and sometimes family members are part of different factions, because the factions pick people who are like them in terms of their thinking. Whereas, of course, familial, it's, well, your family history. But he didn't just have Bigfoot. No. He also had the flag captain, who was Captain Colin Richard Keppel, who'd go on to become an admiral himself, and who was an absolute master of conflict deterrence. If you want a good example of why I can say this and conflict management, he is a key figure in the Fashoda incident, the Fashoda crisis. He is a key naval figure in managing that. Commanding, organizing, leading the gunboat flotilla on the Nile. Sorting it out after the Khartoum campaign had ended in 1898. He is a key figure in dealing with this. He is one of the Royal Navy's safest pair of hands. Again, it should be noted that Bickford retires from the Royal Navy in 1908. Keppel retires in 1913. I would argue quite strongly that when you look at the Royal Navy's skilled practitioners of conflict management, the senior officers who could do it well, i.e. we're talking anyone above the rank of Rear Admiral, there is a dearth. They all seem to be retiring between 1905 and 1913. And whilst there are some Rear Admirals, and there are some Commodores and Captains who certainly have experience and skills, this is a loss. This is a big loss. Bickford going, well, was never a local admiral. He was always managing distant stations. But Keppel, and this officer, by the way, this captain, when Somerville is first under him, later admiral, is a descendant, tangentially, well, no, up, and it's basically his many greats uncle is the Augustus Keppel, who I was mentioning earlier as the head of the communications faction. The guy who started off the communications signals faction in the Royal Navy, the obsession with that. It's one of those joyous things where it links together. Yes, I'm talking about two Keppels here. There is one who was 1725 to 1786, who's the admiral we all think about when I mention Keppel. Colin Keppel, he is 1862 to 1947. 1862 to 1947. And he, well, his career after service on Warspite was HMS Implacable, which was a battleship in 1905, then Commodore of commanding the Royal Yachts. Again, not a position for the faint-hearted. Not a position for the faint-hearted. Second in command, after being made Rear Admiral, second in command of the Atlantic Fleet. And then he took one of the Royal Yachts to India when it was taking King George V and Queen Mary out there. They decided that, they needed someone very, very skilled in command of that ship. Made a Vice Admiral in 1913 and retired after that. He was promoted post-service to a full Admiral in 1917. But, yeah. He mainly fulfills his roles after that. After 1913, he is nominated as an equerry in Ordinary, and then becomes an extra equerry after 1915, a post he held until 1937 under both King Edward VIII and George VI. He was also Sergeant at Arms of the British House of Commons from 1915, and didn't resign till 1935. He was heavily involved in Britain. Heavily involved was Pickford. It was Colin Keppel and Andrew Bickford, and they took a liking to Somerville. He worked with them. He was a useful officer. He was a junior officer who was spotted by Keppel and introduced to Bickford. And working with him, and for him working with them, made his next move possible. His first command. Now, you might think, well, Alex, what are you talking about? His first command? He's a lieutenant. Yes. And he wasn't technically a lieutenant when he seems to get command of her, because technically he makes lieutenant in March 1904, and technically he should be lieutenant to be in command of her, and therefore be in command of her from March to May 1904. But there is a discussion. The phrase keeps coming up, early 1904, he's in charge for. Early 1904. And this caused me a bit of fun to go and research, and the earliest date I have ascribed to it is January. But I put a question mark by it because I'm not sure. I think he was in charge of her before March. I'm 90% certain it was before March, but whether it was February or January, January's the earliest it could be to be early 1904, but February's probably more likely. But either way, he gets command of her the phrase is, they give command of it to him for the summer cruise. Well, May's not summer, May is spring. So, I don't think it was for the summer cruise either. There are incidents going on in 1904. There are things happening in the world. There are also testing happening with reserve torpedo boats to try and work out how to communicate and work together. And putting a young officer of his skill set aboard such a vessel would be interesting. Now, there are some interesting things here. Now, these are 140-foot torpedo boats, the 140-footers. It was built by J.S. White, and it was really the last generation of them to be built, because they are completed 1894 period. And at the same time, torpedo boat destroyers are starting to come into service. And whilst you will have a few more torpedo boats built and a few more of these vessels come in, realistically, the Royal Navy is going to start pushing towards the torpedo boat destroyers from this point onwards. But these were first-class torpedo boats. Had 18-inch torpedoes. And they definitely did reward aggression, but they also have a very, very small crew. Hence, they're under the command of the lieutenant. This is Somerville's first command, and that is supposed to be TB-95, a picture of her herself, which I was quite proud to try and track down a copy of I could use. After this, he returns to the China station. This is another experience I have to admit in conflict management and also conflict monitoring. They're actually part of the force which is being dispatched to the Singapore Straits to watch the Russian force, that's of course on its way to eventually fight the Battle of Tsushima, pass through. They arrive a little bit late to reinforce the forces at Singapore Straits, but they then spot them the next day, render them salutes, and make sure they know they're being monitored by the Royal Navy. And pretty much that's his experience. He does conflict management. He's watching the Russo-Japanese War from HMS Sutlej. She's a good ship. She's a good cruiser, and she gives him some much-needed experience. And he doesn't return to the torpedo school till 1907. Which means he gets to serve under some interesting officers. Robert Johnson Stewart, William Grant, and Captain Francis S. Miller. All of these officers have interesting careers, but also all of them will turn out to be ones who will help promote Somerville. They'll all consider him useful. Miller had, of course, written the Royal Navy's handbook on navigational subjects, and had got a full thank you from the Admiralty for doing that. He would be eventually appointed to the Hydrographic Department, and would have all sorts of duties towards the scientific side of the Royal Navy. William Grant, well, what can I say about this gentleman who goes on to become a full admiral? He was a master at the arts of diplomacy. He was a diplomacy specialist. He was not really a conflict deterrent specialist. He was good at diplomacy specialist, though. He was good at coordinating with allies and working with them. That's one of the reasons why he finds himself in 1918 on the North America West Indies Station. But also, if you consider his career in service during World War I, where he's been put, he was appointed to command the China Station in 1915 to coordinate with the Japanese and coordinate things with them. He had started off World War I in the 6th Cruiser Squadron, flying his flag in HMS Good Hope, and then later on Drake. They're good officers. And Stewart, well, how do I put Stewart? Stewart is a career naval officer who is one of those sailors, it seems. And again, they all start to develop quite a liking for Somerville. And there's a reason they develop a liking for Somerville. And they're all working, because they're starting to get systems involved which require someone with a certain mind to run. And, well, this is where we get into the next phase of his life, because it's unsurprising that a young officer of his rank would go to HMS Vernon, the torpedo school, in 1907. What is possibly surprising is that he goes there in 1907, and I've used the wrong there, and what Microsoft Office hasn't corrected me, to work on the development of wireless telegraphy, with the strong commendation and proposal of all those senior officers he served under. He has been proving exceptionally good and exceptionally useful in their communications and signals team as a junior officer. And they send him to the torpedo school, which is also where the Royal Navy does a lot of electrical work and a lot of its advanced studies at this point, because it's full of those people who can do those advanced studies there already, so you might as well expand the existing centre rather than building a separate centre at this point, because it gives it a base and infrastructure to work from. Well, this is where Somerville is sent, because he's been so useful already. So what is he doing working on wireless telegraphy? What is he doing? Well, Somerville was involved in a lot of the experiments, which were A, working out the range of the Morse code transmissions, B, the modulation, how you can adapt the signals, C, detection by enemy as well as by you on terms of communications, and a lot of the other testing which was going on. The Royal Navy, realistically, with wireless telegraphy, Marconi sends signals across the Atlantic Ocean in 1901. The Royal Navy's been doing testing since the 1890s, 1880s in various ships, and people officers try having ideas and putting stuff on. But the thing is, now you've got to the level to it's practicable. It's been coming in more and more. It's been becoming more and more available, working more and more often, becoming more and more part of what they're doing. The Royal Navy in about 1907, technically 1905, has reached a point where, oh, right then, well, we're going to need specialist officers for this. And we need to work it out. We need to understand it. We need to have a proper profile of it. And how do they approach this? Well, they basically talk to their senior officers who are already out of the fleet, ask them if they have any young officers who already have an aptitude for it. If they do have an aptitude for it, they gather together. Gathering together to torpedo school, Vernon, makes sense. They have to go there to understand torpedoes, and they get taught electrical engineering and some things as part of torpedo management and maintenance then anyway. And theoretically, Somerville should already have had this course before he commanded that torpedo boat, but, well, you know, it's the Royal Navy. I keep trying to explain in so many videos to people that, yes, then there might be a rule about seniority and years of service before you get certain commands, but the Royal Navy has a great policy of do as I say, not necessarily as I do. The Royal Navy will have the rules. They've made the rules, so therefore they can break the rules, is their view, quite often on these things. So, yeah, those aren't always they are good things to have in mind, not necessarily things that you consider concrete and requirements. And with Somerville, yeah, they basically what they have is these officers come in for torpedo school and then they're kept. And then when World War I is approaching, when the Royal Navy's looking at coming at war, suddenly these officers get released as wireless officers of choice. For the wireless office on the ships. And this is the point again about Somerville when he's wandering around. Where he could go, who he could go. Roughly about the same time as Seymour's being promoted is the same time that that Somerville is being taken from 1st Battleship Squadron and they're considering where to post him next. He's literally offered to Beatty. Beatty goes, no, Seymour will do the job. You're talking about a wireless telegraphy specialist. Look at his career during World War I. The Royal Navy doesn't have many of them. Flagship. Every single one. Now, Somerville will be promoted to Lieutenant Commander in 1912. So he was now a lieutenant commander. And that is what he is when he's appointed to HMS Marlborough. That is what he is when he's on Queen Elizabeth. That's what he is when he's on the Flexible. Then he's promoted to commander in 1915. Then he's on Chatham, and then he's on King George V. Now, you might wonder, again, what's he been doing this time? How's he got to lieutenant commander? What's he been doing sea time? Well, every time the Royal Navy has an exercise, those officers from Vernon School would go out and be attached to flagships. They'd be part of the training. They'd be part of the summer cruises, the summer exercises, the big manoeuvres. They were there. They were fulfilling roles. One of the things that often you have to explain is that the Royal Navy might not have a department staff like the Army does, and isn't recognised as such by the government. But they do have various divisions do fulfill those roles. The Royal Navy Intelligence Division actually comes up with the war planning and does the war planning prior to there being an actual Admiralty staff. And the thing is, whilst technically the war plans are maintained in the First Sea Lord's heads, etc., and all these things as a way to stop them being able to be nicked by the enemy, The intelligence division provides all the information and everything to block out those plans. So they can work out pretty much what the plans are going to be. And support it. But the thing is, they're not in a position to then go and brief about those plans to other people because they don't know them, because they're in the First Sea Lord's mind. It's kind of the same with a proper Admiralty a proper staff for naval officers. They know they're going to need wireless telegraphy specialists. They know they're going to need these signals people. They don't have enough of them yet to have them permanently assigned to people, though. So they're sending them out when they need them. For exercises. For flagships. And he does well in this role. He earns growing and glowing appraisals the entirety of his war service. Both Bailey, that's Sir Lewis Bailey, who starts off as the Vice Admiral in charge of 1st Battle Squadron, and Burney, Sir Cecil Burney, give him absolutely glowing reviews. He's excellent for their communications. Jellicoe even likes him, and would probably have nicked him if he hadn't had a slightly more senior officer attached to him. The thing is, Somerville is very, very good at this communications because he understands the science and the engineering behind what he's trying to do. And he refines the communications. He's refining the signaling and handling. He's using all this experience. One of the things that, when you look at the Gallipoli campaign, this is the really interesting thing. Look at the Gallipoli campaign. It's mostly in studying how not to run operations. But if I told you the comms protocols for the Gallipoli campaign, the communication systems, and the ideas which are developed by Somerville out there during the campaign, for coordinating forces ashore, for coordinating ship-to-shore maneuver, for coordinating fleets in support, form the basis of Royal Navy communication doctrine, which would then be employed at D-Day in World War II, and amphibious operations throughout the war. You'd probably be surprised. Because we don't talk about the good parts of Gallipoli. Because, really, it's saying, yeah, we lost a lot of people, failed to achieve the mission, but our comm system was really good. It sounds stupid, doesn't it? But it's the truth. Even in the defeat, even in the loss, something from it came which probably saved thousands, tens of thousands of lives later on. Later on. It's unsurprising an officer this good that when you were putting together the Force Centre Mediterranean, going, we're sending Queen Elizabeth as the status unit, and to give them some lustre, we also need to make this for sure this force works. What's the best thing we can give to the senior officers to make it work? We can give them a comm specialist who can make the fleet work together. And that's what they do. But think about this. 31st of December 1915. Britain had been at war for less than a year. He'd only made lieutenant commander in 1912, 3 years earlier. The Royal Navy, it has not massively expanded. It's undergoing the process of massive expansion, but it's not massively expanded to the extent that they need to suddenly get a whole load of new commanders and start promoting everyone up one rank early. And he's promoted to commander. And is he given an executive officer of a ship, or is he sent off to command a destroyer? No. He's kept on flagships. He's very much kept on flagships. I decided the wireless officer of choice made more sense. Wireless office sounded cooler in my head when I was writing this. Smallest ship he serves on during the entire war, HMS Chatham. This one down here. All the rest, battleships. Fine battleships. Quality battleships. And HMS Inflexible. You know, everyone gets a battle cruiser every now and again. They get a battle cruiser, okay? Just move past it. And then December 1917, he's sent to the Royal Navy Signal School. Now, why is he sent to the Royal Navy Signal School? Well, Captain Barry Kent writes a very interesting and very useful book, which costs between £30 and £50 to find a decent copy on Amazon. There are no links down below to it, but you can find other copies elsewhere. It's up to you where you will find it, but it'll be about £30 to £40. It's a good book. And at this point, the Signals Division were pretty much, and this is taking out from their books of various members on it, responsible for, and it's worthwhile considering what they're responsible for, wireless telegraphy signaling, including the allocation of wireless telegraphy call signs other than commercial. SD signaling, that it tends to be semaphore telegraphy signaling. Visual signaling, including allocation of pendants. Private and recognition signals. Signal books, codes, ciphers, methods of drafting, coding and ciphering. All the orders, SR orders, signalers not responsible for either personnel and material, but will act in an advisory capacity to departments dealing thereof, and should be consulted by them as necessary. All correspondence, preparing, printing, and establishment of all necessary books and instructions in connection therewith. Yeah. In December 1917, the Royal Navy's making a case that, frankly, they need to have communications, and they're getting in their experienced people. Quite a lot of the people, like Somerville, who were pulsed out at the beginning of the war to various flagships, are being withdrawn into Portsmouth to start synthesizing information. It's almost the point at which the Royal Navy in December 1917 has gone, well, we've got enough people to run this war, we now need to start preparing for the next war. When you start looking at how they start treating certain officers' careers in 1917, yeah, it's a good example. Some engineering officers are drawn back in, and these officers are going in there providing a synthesis and information, starting already to write up of the war, lessons of the war. What we need to move on from. What we need to understand. This is one of the reasons why that suppression of the Jutland report by Beatty causes so much trouble. Because, and is also quite so easy to spot and find, because so many different reports are being written at the same time. And they're approaching similar topics from different directions. And if you look at the signals and the information reports of the time, the discussion of Beatty's battle cruisers is damning. It is. And the thing is, most of these reports do not get hushed up. The big strategic one, the big tactical discussion, historical discussion of Battle of Jutland, oh yes, we're going to, that rolls into the Jutland scandal, with the report being hushed up. The subsidiary reports, the ones on the side produced by the officers like good old Somerville, going back, they're not. They are not. And that leads us to the shameless book plug. Now, why am I doing shameless book plug? Well, because I'm a naval historian, because I have a book that I can plug and no one else is going to plug, and because it allows me to say thank you to everyone for supporting the channel, for liking, sharing, subscribing, for everything that helps the channel grow. Thank you. It really does matter, and it really is helpful. Also, it tends to serve as a good marker point when I'm doing alternate histories and other things, as it's a point where people can go, oh, before that it's this, after that it's this. It's a fun it's a fun thing to do. I know. Thank you. You make this all work. Your support, your super chats, your super thanks, your Patreon memberships, your topic suggestions, all of these things are what make the channel works, and without it I wouldn't be able to do anything that I'm doing. So thank you. It does really matter, and it does really help. Also, I'm really not sure what is going to be Sunday's video, but we'll see. We'll see. Now, unsurprising perhaps, when he does eventually return to sea in HMS Ajax in March 1920, in April 1920 she becomes the flagship of Vice Admiral Sir John de Roebuck, Commander-in-Chief of the Mediterranean Fleet. Oh my, isn't that strange? The person who was also his comm specialist in Gallipoli campaign and various other things suddenly becomes an executive officer on a ship, and I need a new flagship. Oh, I'm going to go to Ajax. And he serves aboard HMS Emperor of India for a while. He has a nice experience, but again, this is experience as an executive officer. And if you're looking at his career so far, you might be going, Alex, how much sea time does he actually have? More than you'd think from his list of commands. But he does spend rather a long time, and rather a lot of his time, handling gold braid. He seems to spend an inordinate amount of time being very close to very senior officers. As a senior aide, as a senior assistant, as their communications right hand. Talking with them, working with them, asking, helping them refine their communications policy. Somerville is a master at managing up. There is an interesting conversation to be had about Somerville, if that he hadn't gone off ill when he did in 1939, when he'd been made, well, before 1939, when he'd been made sick and left the Navy for illness. There is a good argument that he is the next contender for Third Sea Lord. He has the technical skills, and he has the experience and skills managing upwards within the Navy, which is usually good skills for then going and managing politicians. He's certainly on the list to have been a potential Third Sea Lord. Unfortunately, illness got in the way. He worked himself out. But at this point, he's very much in his full throes of life. He's executive officer aboard these big, thundering battle wagons. A guy who's barely served on a cruiser, certainly hasn't been an executive officer on a cruiser, was the comms officer. He's been comms officer on many battleships. Seen them running. Never been a navigation officer. Never been any of the duties you'd normally expect from their traditional careers at this point. He was a communication specialist. A skilled communication specialist. And yes, he's been trained well. Yes, he has been sat there watching admirals and captains issuing orders and running their ships, being at their right hand for most of those periods, helping them communicate with the world. But his experience up till now in terms of naval command, not massive. It gets even more fun as we go on in his career. It gets even more fun as we go on in his career, because he returns to the Admiralty in 1922. He's done some sea time and takes over as Deputy Director of Signals at the Admiralty. Basically, as far as the Royal Navy is concerned, he is the second most senior signals and communications officer in the entire Navy. The second most senior communications officer in the entire Navy. He has key roles in setting the future of wireless telegraphy, in setting the future of radio and electronics research, and most importantly, in setting up the new standards and command protocols and synthesizing in all that experience he gained in World War I, all that knowledge he developed by working with others who were synthesizing their similar experience at the Portsmouth Signal School from 1917 onwards, and he's now putting that all together. He is a commander, yes, in rank. But in terms of status, there are rear admirals wandering around the Royal Navy at this point who do not have as much pull as one Commander James Somerville does, and do not have the experience and understanding and training he has. I would argue very quickly that I would not sure if he's had necessarily enough time of sea command in terms of ship command. But in terms of fleet command, he's probably had more experience than any other officer before him. He's basically been sitting for the last, by this point, decade, watching admirals, watching senior officers make decisions, giving them the information, watching how they react to that information, being able to ask questions when they want to send out signals of what do they want to say, how do they want to say it. And the thing about the communications person on your ship is they will know everything because they have to know everything. Everything will go through them. They're one of the most critical nodes on a ship. I was remember a discussion, and it's off topic, but it's worthwhile, of Uhura, and the amount of people who were surprised that she ends up becoming an admiral when she was a comms lady. She's a comms officer. Surely, that's unusual. It's not. Think about it. When you're talking about senior command, who is going to have, as a junior officer, have the most exposure to senior command? Is it going to be an engineer? No, they're off in engines. Is it going to be a gunnery officer or weapons officer? Nope, they're going to be manning the guns, dealing with what's in front of them. Is it going to be a navigation officer? Well, they're probably going to get a bit, but they are probably going to spend quite a lot of time checking they're going in the right direction and not, bashing into underwater rocks. The only officers who are going to spend their entire time focused on what the people above them are doing and thinking about and asking questions about and trying to work and plan around, it's going to be the comms officer. It's unsurprising that is a position which often leads to senior ranks. I have fun with it today because there are often people go, well, they're not a fighting section, they're not this. No, but they are the ones who are going to be most familiar with discussions of senior officers. The only junior officer position which actually trains you for senior command is being a comms officer. Everything else trains you to be a very good specialist in command of that section of the ship or that component of the army or that aircraft for the Royal Air Force, or whatever you're doing. Comms officers are the only ones who are routinely being trained and being forced by the situation to think about what is beyond what they are doing now, because it's literally their job. Now he gets flag captain. Amazingly, again, he goes out to actually command ships, and he's immediately a flag captain for a guy called Admiral John Kelly, who I'm going to talk about towards the end. It's almost like there are admirals literally sitting there going, come on. When you graduate to captain, when you become captain, please. And he becomes a captain. He's promoted to captain in December 1921. Literally just before he goes off to become Deputy Director of Signals. And his first posting is Deputy Director of Signals. The next posting, we need this guy. We need this guy quickly because we need the flag. We need a flag officer. We need a flag officer. But let's think about this. Barring November 1923, when Captain Creighton takes over quickly due to issues for a month or so, he spends from August 1922 to October 1924 in charge of HMS Benbow. This is the second ship he has ever commanded. This is 1922. His last command was back in 1904. It was more than 18 years previously and was a 140-foot torpedo boat. His second command is a nearly 623-foot Iron Duke class battleship. There is a difference in this. There is a difference. And by all counts, he does a pretty decent job. Again, it's a 4th Battle Squadron. Now, I've already mentioned John Kelly, who he serves under first, but he serves under 2 admirals in this role as flag captain. Again, that's kind of unusual to stay as a flag captain for 2 admirals in a row. And the second officer is Hugh Dudley Richards Watson. Great name, isn't it? Hugh Dudley Richards Watson. And a pretty cool senior officer for the Royal Navy he was. He had commanded HMS Essex and an armoured cruiser and HMS Bellerophon during World War I. He'd also commanded HMS Canada as well in 1918 to 1919. He was a capable officer of the Royal Navy, but he did have some weaknesses, and one of the reasons why he is given a communications expert as his flag captain is that was considered a bit of a weakness. It was considered a bit of a weakness. So having a comms expert as your flag captain balances you out. You have to remember, this is the point at which the Royal Navy's still getting around the idea of, do senior officers get the chief of staff? Well, they do if they've got an independent fleet command, or if they're just a squadron. The flag captain will do both roles. And this is the point. Flag captain at this point, especially in these battle squadrons, is pretty much doing both roles as both chief of staff and also commander of their ship. And even when they are on higher commands, like, let's say, the Mediterranean Fleet, and they're the flag captain, then they will be... Sorry. Yeah. Fun. Speaking of his ears, he's going to have an operation on Thursday, so... Yeah, sort of Thursday... that'll be the 3rd, won't it? I think. Thursday the 3rd of... Yeah, April 2025. You're going to have an operation, aren't you? So hopefully your ears will be sorted out and they'll be better, okay? But will this help the pain? Will this help the pain? Good boy. That's what Somerville's doing. Somerville is the comms officer, but he's now the flag captain. He's now the senior officer talking to this admiral, trying to explain what's going on in the world, trying to help him understand, trying to be a sounding board, as well as running his ship. There are good reasons also for having an officer like Somerville as a flag captain. It means you're going to have a lot of other experienced officers around who can help him running the ship. There is actually someone who needs to lean on him a bit for comms systems and to understand and deal with the wireless telegraphy and do all the communications. And in return, he can quietly get some advice on how to run the ship, because Hugh Dudley Richards Watson is great at running a ship. So is John Kelly. But John Kelly's a bit of a special case we'll be talking about at the end, because he is realistically Somerville's mentor for the 1920s and into the 1930s. And this is when he returns. In February 1925 to February 1927, he returns as Director of Signals, the Admiralty. In these critical years for the Royal Navy in its 1920s evolution, the head of signals, the senior signals and communications officer for the entirety of the Royal Navy, the acknowledged expert in communications, is Somerville. That is where he gets his chance to really enshrine what he's learnt, what he believes, what he understands, not just as instructions, but in every layer. He can write the curriculum for the signal school. He can write the standards for signals and communications, and he can sign them all off. He's the one who's going to be advising the Sea Lords on what they do, and let's be honest, none of them are in a position to technologically gainsay him. If he says this is how it should be done, they can't argue back. They really can't. It's a position of unprecedented power in some regards at this point in history, because as time goes on, of course, the officers get more and more familiar with the wireless telegraphy, they get more and more understanding of it, and so they are in a position to argue back, because they do use it, at least as consumers, if not as implementers. And so, this is what they're dealing with. This is what Somerville's dealing with. It's a critical position at a critical juncture. And especially at this point, because the Royal Navy's really pushing into night fighting. And if you use visual signals, semaphore, or flags, those can either reveal your position at night by flashing lights, and, well, flags are not possibly going to be visible. Probably won't be visible. Depends on the quite point of the night we're talking about. So, radio it is. But radio is not silent. That's also detectable. How do you focus radio? How do you manage to do it in a way which isn't going to reveal your position? How do you pass over the maximum amount of information with the minimum transmission, so the enemy, A, can't get enough of a transmission to get a fix in a position, but B, might not hear it at all, and C, even if they do hear it, won't be able to tell what you're doing. That is what the signals office and the signals team are wrestling with at this point in the Admiralty in 1920s. And Somerville is the person heading all that. Somerville is the person designing the future of the Royal Navy's communications. And I was like, he gets to go be a flag captain again! Isn't it wonderful? Flag captain. Again, 1st Battle Squadron this time. Now, if you've heard me talk about them, and I've done videos about some of the interwar exercises the Royal Navy do, you'll know that 1927 to 1929, the Royal Navy really step up their major exercise game in the Mediterranean. They have a habit of bringing the entire home fleet along, and the Mediterranean fleet, and telling them to go to war with each other. They literally have a habit of doing this just below Italy. I'm not saying they're involved in some diplomatic signalling here, but when you have the entire Mediterranean home fleets going to war against each other in the middle of the Mediterranean, just south of you, it does kind of hammer home when each of the forces involved has more ships than your entire fleet. It's kind of a, oh, frigate. They have a lot of ships here. They do. There are some of these exercises we're talking about. They would be pretty much the entirety of the two fleets fighting each other. And sitting there as flag captain of the second in command of Mediterranean squadron of the Mediterranean fleet, when you have to remember that, as a rule, especially if they're hosting Mediterranean, the commander-in-chief of the Mediterranean fleet plays chief umpire. So the one who actually runs the Med fleet in these battles is the deputy commander of the Mediterranean fleet. For a lot of them. So the flag captain of the ships which are actually of the admiral who's running the Mediterranean fleet for those operations is Somerville, who's putting in and implementing his night command and night communication systems. They're testing all the different ideas they've come up with. They're testing all their war lessons, and they're building on it. It's what the 1920s are about. It's about bringing the Royal Navy together as a modern fleet for the post-war World War I world, for implementing all the lessons they've learned. And that's what they're doing. Somerville, again, is at the forefront of this. And this is where we start to really get an idea of his own leadership style, because up until this point he's been mainly in positions where it's a technical leadership, or in some regards, whilst he has been on a ship, he hasn't really had the experience to build up a naval following. But it's in this command that he's bringing officers with him, that he's bringing in personnel, that he's starting to select commanders and people who he thinks are skilled himself. He's done that for the signals team before. He hasn't done that for the other teams, but he now starts to do this. Saying that, though, he does manage to bash up Warspite. Doesn't do it personally, but he is her captain when she runs into something, which is why they end up transferring to Barham. He dinged Warspite. Seriously, I am still surprised to this day every time that some of my colleagues say nice things about him, considering their views on Warspite. Dinging her is sacrilege. But leaving that to one side, after all this experience and after doing this work between 1927 and 1929, really honing the Royal Navy skills, the Imperial Defence College, now today the Royal College of Defence Studies, he's called to directing staff. This is the big thing. This is where he starts to provide his knowledge, his skills to the wider British Armed Forces. And that is, again, something which is important. We're talking about people who are training the officers and training people who are going to be the ones making decisions on radar, on all the new systems which are going to be coming in the 1930s. All the systems which are being developed. You want something, don't you? You get a hug. Good boy. And he's been called in to train them, to try and produce across the forces some sort of commonality of approach, some sort of standardization, some sort of, how do I put this politely, integration. Because honestly, there is a lot of trouble getting the forces to work together on these things, because they all have their own ideas of what they need. And those ideas reflect their situation, reflect what they are going to do with it. And again, Somerville actually does achieve quite skills on this. He does achieve quite a lot. He is considered one of those officers who actually managed to bring the armed forces together. And again, on this front, you can argue that one of the reasons why Britain does end up in World War II, that the communication systems between the forces work as well as they do work, and I'm not saying they're perfect by any stretch of the imagination, or that they're even excellent, but they're good and okay, is in large part because of the work that Somerville and some other officers with him managed to achieve at the Imperial Defence College. That was useful. And it's, by the way, it's based in Camberley at Sandhurst. It's a lovely army institution which has been adapted to be tri-service. And still going to this day. Still going to this day. Yep. Mike, can I? Oh, thank you. And it's finally after this, and this is where we end, before we get to the summary point. We've sort of finished talking about his career. He finally gets a private ship to command. He gets his own ship. That's a good thing, isn't it? He gets his own ship. Finally! No Admiral! He gets HMS Norfolk. He gets HMS Norfolk. And he gets the commander in December 1931. That's a great thing. He's got his first ship. Well, she had taken part in the Invergordon Mutiny in September 1931. So she was a ship which was a troubled ship at this point. And so he's been appointed to command her, and will command her till May 1932, which is a not bad stretch, literally to rebuild her. He is about to be promoted to Commodore. He is in 1932, he's promoted to Commodore. He's made Commodore of the Royal in command of the Royal Navy Barracks in Portsmouth, and then he'll start to go up various things, including becoming Vice Admiral, commanding destroyer flotillas in the Mediterranean. Despite his destroyer experience being commanding of one torpedo boat, that's literally what's used to justify him being able to be Rear Admiral destroyers. By the way, that he has commanded a torpedo boat. That command is incredibly important. Otherwise, he couldn't have been Rear Admiral destroyers, which meant he couldn't have had the right kind of command to go to go up to his next position. So that torpedo boat was incredibly important. That experience. But even as he's been given a communications project, they've got a ship which has recently taken part in mutiny. They want to get it back in working order. They need it back working order. It's one of the newest county-class cruisers to enter service. It's a critical ship. Because if you think about it, she's launched in 1928, but she was commissioned in April 1930. She is less than 2 years old, and she's already had a major mutiny. Yes, it was due to the government pay issues. Yes, there are various levels of Navy responsible for bad implementation of that and government, but we'll leave that to one side. She's a vital unit. They need to get her back working. And they send in Somerville. And Somerville is able to turn her over to her next captain, and that is Hewlin Bulgrove, who will go off and take her and be a flag captain and chief staff to Rear Admiral Drax. He's able to sort her out. She does a good job for him. She does. And he gets the best out of the crew. One of the things, again, is it's felt he has a very clear communication style. He has a very clear understanding of what are the issues. What are the communication problems? How to communicate with the crew. It's the reports that come back are that he was very clearly defined what he wanted from the crew, and very clearly defined how they would be treated and how they could expect to be treated. He managed to get the crew on side quickly. He also has to do some sharp things. Some personnel are transferred off. There is a reason why it's not a long-term appointment. It's we're bringing in someone to fix the mess. This ship has had a mess. We need to sort it out. We need to root out the problems, whether they are communication, misunderstandings with the crew, or they're individuals who are causing trouble and unrest. Somerville does it. And when she's turned over to Bulgrove, well, he and Drax are very, very happy with her. They consider her one of the finest ships in the fleet. A little over, 5 months? Maybe less, actually, considering it's May 1932 and he doesn't get appointed till after Christmas in December. 28th of December 1931. They tried to give Brickett, who was her first captain, time to sort it out. He was in post January 1930 to December 1931. They tried to give him time to sort it out and deal with it initially after September, but it wasn't working. Brickett had built the crew from scratch. Too close to the issue, probably, to solve it. To see where the issues were at that point. And so Somerville was called in. And that's the time he gets a private ship. First time he doesn't have an admiral looking over his head. He literally gets it for a few months to fix it. I mean, if the guy went out of the screaming abdabs at the Admiralty, I would not have been surprised. I would have done. For a Royal Navy officer, their entire career is focused on one day achieving ship command. That is the pinnacle for many of them as far as they're concerned. Yes, they might go on to more senior ranks and they have more honour and more duties and responsibility, and that's all lovely. But commanding a ship is the pinnacle. That's what they're all focused on. And it's a private ship. Not a flagship they want to command. They don't want to constantly be having to deal with a flag staff, and they don't want to constantly having to deal with senior officers who outrank them that can tell them what to do on their own ship. They want to have that command. That's what they've been trained for. Can you imagine how frustrating it must have been? Finally gets a private ship and doesn't have it for just a few months. Fix it and then hand it over, because we're going to promote you again. At least he'd have probably hoped to have kept it till, well, no, the trouble is if he kept it to October 1932, he'd have had to deal with our Rear Admiral Drax coming aboard, so he still wouldn't have had a private ship. It would have been a flagship again. But they had uses for him. He was a very skilled officer. And he has very, very good advocates. John Kelly is probably his biggest advocate and is the person who he spent a large chunk of the 1920s with. John Kelly was the second in command of the Mediterranean fleet, etc., who in charge of the battle squadron that I was talking about earlier for the exercises, and had been his previous when he'd been in the battle squadron as a flag captain. Both of his periods as flag captain involved some time with John Kelly. Kelly respected him. Kelly requested him. Kelly would go on to have his own interesting time in the Royal Navy, trying to prepare it for future conflicts by keeping the reserve strength going. He had led the reinforcement of the Mediterranean fleet during the Channel crisis in 1922. He had been 4th Sea Lord from April 1924 to about October 1926. He was Admiral commanding reserves from 1929 onwards. And it was Kelly who took the lead in sorting out the Atlantic fleet after the Invergordon Mutiny. He was the one who was given command in October 1931 to sort it out. He was the one who selected in December 1931 Somerville to take over Norfolk and sort out Norfolk. And he was also the one that the Atlantic fleet be renamed the Home Fleet before he took up his new command. Because he wanted the Invergordon Mutiny to be, well, if you change the name, you lose some of the disgrace. It's the Home Fleet. And he also was the man who basically wrote a report that was publicly issued that was critical of the Admiralty Board's handling of the pay cuts in the first place. Basically, with the support of Somerville and some other officers in the Home Fleet, including a certain recently appointed Rear Admiral aircraft carriers, they produced a report which basically went, this is not how you do things. Rear Admiral aircraft carriers in this period, in the early 1930s, of course, is the first Rear Admiral aircraft carriers, Admiral Henderson, and how badly it had been handled. Kelly is a good naval officer, a good commanding officer. Again, he's never on the grounds to become First Sea Lord, but having had experience as 4th Sea Lord in charge of Royal Navy logistics, he certainly should have been on the list for a potential 2nd Sea Lord. But he dies at a nursing home in 1936. He'd been promoted Admiral of the Fleet in July 1936. He dies age 65 in 1936. Yes, he's an older officer by this point. I do agree, and so this is probably why he didn't get the post he might have had. But as an Admiral of the Fleet, which he was promoted to, as a full Admiral, which he had been, in considering his service experience, you would have expected him to possibly do more than finish as Commander-in-Chief of Portsmouth. And he took that role on in January 1935. He was in full health in January 1936 at the funeral of King George VI. He's promoted to Admiral of the Fleet in July 1936, and as said, dies in a nursing home in November 1936. Goodness gracious me, being a senior officer in the Royal Navy in the 1930s is possibly life-threatening. It really is. And that was the officer who I would argue trained Somerville the most. Somerville gets taught to speak his mind. Somerville gets taught to lead by example. And Somerville gets taught to lead by communications. He is trained as a communications officer. He has studied under countless senior officers by this point, flag captains and admirals. But beyond that, he's watched other admirals. He's been the communications person in the room with all these senior officers. And so when we're looking at his performance in World War II, when we're looking at the standards he holds himself to, when we're looking at the calculations he takes, we have to consider that what we're dealing with is an officer who has spent his career being trained for high command by exposure. Osmosis, one could argue, but it's far more interactive than that process. By an officer who also spent a goodly portion of his career being trained by old school naval officers, in terms of the ones who had achieved their rank before technology really came in, and who had to make decisions without the information available, and were adjusting and working out how to include the information that came available. And he was the one bringing the information to them. This is him aboard Warspite, which he had been flag captain of with his flag captain, Captain G.N. Oliver. The ship which he had been the flag captain of Kelly aboard, where he had served for a few more years of learning. I always think it's interesting just how often Kelly does bring him in for things. Kelly really has a very, very profound understanding of the quality of the man he has had the pleasure of having at his right-hand side. And he's worked with him well. And that's the positioning and the discussions which mean that when Somerville is eventually sicked out of the Navy and then slowly brought back in because of various needs, yeah, he's useful. I should also point out that as one of his duties as Rear Admiral is he's made Director of Personnel Services in the Admiralty. That's May 1934. And he is the one who introduces the Seamen's Welfare Scheme, which is being developed to stop the problems that led to the Invergordon Mutiny. Stop it ever happening again. And he is appointed that position on recommendation of Admiral Kelly. They take care of their sailors. That was established at an early point. They communicate openly with their sailors, but they expect high standards of them. So with that being said, I need to finish this, and I always finish my videos with a question. The question is, I want you to think, who are the other comms officers who achieved high command in World War II? There are some, and they end up in some very interesting positions. But it's more often that we're talking about destroyermen, or battleship men, or carrier men. We're talking about the ships they served on. But let's be honest, Somerville would look, if you look at his ship list, he looks very much like a battleship man, but he's not one, is he? He's a comms officer. He's a pure and pure communications officer. Who else is there at senior level in World War II? That being said, what's coming up? Well, next week we have the Battle of Zonchio, which I'm hopefully going to be recording today. Should be fun. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. And please, if you do like the video, please consider like, sharing, and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. And I hope you found it interesting. And yeah, thanks for all your support for making this channel possible.